Hello and welcome fellow motorsports fans. It's time to talk about another great feeder series race week gone by. We've had fantastic karting action with drama playing out that should interest you even if you're not a regular karting fan. And of course we've had the showdown in Barcelona with the F4 title and the Euro Cup 3 title being decided, as well as a new SuperFormula champion. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get to it. We begin with our usual quick karting report, and here it is time to talk about the WSK Final Cup. That's a 2-round series with the second round in 2 weeks' time, I believe, and it is essentially the last big European karting competition of the year, so definitely one to watch. And as I said, there was an absolute banger in the shifter class, but of course we will start with the youngest kids in the mini under 10s, and here it has been the year of Nicolo Perico. We've talked about him multiple times at this point, but in this particular final he has been taken out of contention midway through by a 3-second time penalty, finally leaving the door open for someone else to take the top step, and instead he more or less, I don't really know how willingly, but more or less just helped out teammate Marc Lumetz, the young Estonian, to finally take a victory for himself. Lumetz has had a very neat little podium streak recently, but I think this is the first time in a pretty long time for him to actually be on the top step. Then, last time's hero Andrea Ianni also had another good performance to put it on P2, and we can finally highlight Lorenzo Di Pietrantonio. I can't pronounce his name. He's from around Rome, I believe, at least. He's from around Rome, I believe, a young Italian racer, and he has usually been one of the front runners and like a regular podium threat in this particular category. And this trend has more or less stopped as soon as I started regularly covering WSK competitions. So I haven't talked about him yet, but it is definitely one of the kids you should remember. I do want to highlight the unfortunate side of motorsports here as well though, because we've had, obviously, we've all realized by now I love Titz, Devin Titz, the German young racing driver, but it turns out he has apparently run out of money, at least out of the kind of money you need to compete internationally, because he wanted to compete in this very round and just couldn't afford to. They are currently looking for sponsorship on Instagram, and I think if you have that issue while you're not even, at double-digit age, then this is not a great look for your future motorsports career. But I am wishing him all the best because, as I've said over the last couple of weeks, kid looks pretty talented, and it's just a shame to lose them before they ever even get a chance to develop, you know what I mean? Then with the slightly older kids in the mini group 3s, we had the Italian champion Julian Fresnelli getting one of his best results on the European stage, at least as far as I remember, by taking the win in the final. But of course, if you've watched Mini Group 3 at all or followed it through me, for example, then this has been the year of Daniel Miron Lorente in the class. There's no discussion about it, and it really looked to be the case here as well until he got dropped all the way to P7 near the end of the final. So I wouldn't really put too much onto this particular result. The more interesting story here is actually for me that I was awfully wrong. I've said recently about, okay, once Daniel Miron Lorente can graduate, then Alexander Leganki can maybe start winning races again in this category. And turns out it's the other way around actually. DML won't be graduating yet, but Leganki has actually stepped up to the OKNJ class, which I won't be covering here, but just so you know, he is now racing with the slightly older kids. Talking about the slightly older kids, in the OKJ category, we really only had one predominant story, and that is Filippo Sala doubling up from his dominant win at the Trofeo dell'Industria with another dominant weekend and a just pretty controlled win in the final to make it 2 out of 2 with his new Forza Racing team. It really was a Forza Racing weekend all around, with not only Filippo Sala but also Domain and Zulfikari sort of in the top 5. And truth be told, when you look through these entry lists, it's very apparent now that about half of the very relevant names are driving for Forza Racing, so that really is the European team to beat at the moment. Sala did finish ahead of Noah Baglin, who yet again just missed out on finding a win, but at least keeps being a consistent threat at the front of the grid, so that's nice to see and really gives us a pretty decent idea of what we'll be watching throughout European competition next season. There's a couple new interesting faces in the class this time around though, and I want to highlight two of them, Jacob Ashcroft and Moritz Gronek. I think Ashcroft competed at the World Championship, but otherwise he's been one of the British Rotax competitors and racing at a national level in the UK, for example, but one of the very, very good ones, of course. I've talked about him multiple times, so it's really nice to see him make the jump. I hope, but I would assume that wasn't just a one-off, and he might actually go on to a European campaign next season, and I do think that's a mega important step. And similar story really for Moritz Gronek, who was the best German national OKJ driver, now also making the step to internet competition for, as far as I'm aware, the first time proper. Then in the OK seniors, we had Sebastiano Pavan denying Dries van Langendonk his maiden victory in the class. For Pavan, it was his debut with World Racing, so also one of the, better debuts you can have, I suppose. But I really want to highlight all the new faces in this category as well, because that is really the big story. Just what a big turnover we had for this key event in particular. The biggest names probably to highlight are Zach Drummond, Luke Cornder and Rocco Coronel coming over from the juniors. Cornder stands out in that particular mix with the other stars of the class, but we'll get to that in a second. Then we have Macaulay Bishop making a jump over from Rotax competition, which I'm super happy to see. I hope this also isn't a one-off. We've talked about Bishop not having the budget to make the jump to car racing, even though he definitely should, based on everything he's displayed over his karting career. And if there is one way to, get more eyeballs in the karting world, then it's this. Get to proper European competition and see what you can do over there. And I can just tell you, he hit the ground running, nothing to be worried about there. And then last but not least of the new names, there was a guy who, even his nationality I already forgot. He was just called Dilu, probably Chinese. That's maybe racist, I don't even know anymore, but I just want to highlight him. He came out of nowhere and was running in the top 5 more or less all weekend, so I'll be keeping my eyes out for where he pops up next. And then, as I just said, I want to quickly point out Luke Cornder in particular, because he has been one of these also rans of the German OK Junior competitors, same as Amin Kara Osman really. They've been not really making finals at any sort of consistent basis, usually in the midfield of the super heats or pre-finals, so really nothing super impressive. But here at this step up, he hit the ground running and looked significantly improved and was actually a top 10 threat and fighting for proper positions high up the midfield. So maybe he is one of those guys just really profiting from stepping up to slightly quicker machinery. Maybe it helps that the level is a tiny bit lower, although with all of these graduates now, I don't even really think that's the case. Either way, this grid looks sick going into next season. And now for the juicy bit, for some drama over in the Shifter KZ2 karts, where yet again it's been the storyline we've had all year. It's been Burlard versus Maranello, and yet again both Marcus Kayak and David Trefilov taking on the unbeatable seemingly Christian Bertucca. But here he looked very beatable, because it actually looked like Marcus Kayak's weekend. He had the upper hand, he put it on pole, I think he won the heats, he was leading the pre-final, and then it happened. His rear axle just broke out of nowhere for a very disastrous DNF. This meant Bertucca was in prime position to just take the lead in the final and run away with it, which he was more or less doing, but he was closely shadowed by the Maranellos all race long, but both Trefilov and Kayak, the pair actually swapped positions a couple times, and then we had last lap contact between Trefilov and Bertucca, where Trefilov into turn 1, let's just say was very optimistic on the brakes and did take Bertucca out, not fully fortunately at least, but at least sent him down the top 10 quite a bit. Trefilov himself finished the race in first, but rightfully got penalized after the fact, so even though he stood on the top step of the podium briefly, it was Marcus Kayak's win after all. So I guess we've gone full circle. We got the rightful champion or rightful winner at the end. The champion will be decided in 2 weeks, but either way, what an entertaining story, and really a good reason not to only watch the finals, but definitely I'd encourage anyone to watch pre-finals as well. Anyway, time to talk about car racing. We had the SuperFormula title decider fittingly over at Suzuka, And equally fittingly, it was Sho Tsuboi cruising to the title with a pair of very solid P2s, completing the same achievement Ritomu Miyata has done last year in the exact same seat. Tomoko Nojiri just lacked the raw pace to actually fight for podiums this time out. Despite 2 solid races, it really felt difficult to put any blame on him. It looked a bit like Mugen may have dropped the ball, but obviously we can't tell from the outside. And then Tadasuke Makino just couldn't really make the required progress in the second race in particular, and truth be told, he was a little too far off at that point anyway, and he even conceded P2 to Nojiri by a single point, and as I said, Nojiri didn't have the best weekend of his career either. The big headline this weekend, no doubt about it though, was the other than the line driver, Kakunoshi Notta, absolutely stealing the show by pulling off what Tsuboi did at Fuji, getting a dominant double. Not just getting a double, not just having a good weekend or an almost perfect weekend, but actually pretty much dominating both of these races as much as you can in like a specky series like this. It is only his second series, and without a streak of shit luck, he would have been in the title hunt, I think. So definitely a future SuperFormula star in the making. And then a story that maybe didn't hit me quite as hard. I haven't been following SuperFormula for a decade or anything. I've only been watching for a couple of years really. But the veteran and legend and 2-time champion, I believe, Naoki Yamamoto, finishing his long and decorated career by keeping fresh-tired Ayumu Iwasa behind to take a hard-fought P6. Yes, he finished just behind young teammate Ren Sato on his last race ever, but I have to say he still very much wiped the floor with Ren Sato over the course of the season, so in many ways he did finish his career showing one more time that he really is a stellar driver, and that just because you're a lot younger than him doesn't mean you can just easily beat him or anything. It's always sad to see legends leave the sport, obviously, but at the same time I do appreciate it when they get to leave on a high, or at least on a reasonably high note such as this. We also had Japan's primary feeder series, the SuperFormula Lights, competing, and here was Saito Nonaka with a wicked weekend with 3 dominant wins on track, even though a penalty dropped him back down in the second race. I don't really know what he got the penalty for. That's the downside of not speaking Japanese. Either way, clearly the man of the weekend. In general, the weekend was very heavily dominated by the 4 Toms entries. I mean, it's no surprise if they actually make up half of the competitive grid, but either way, this left championship leader Sion Koide with a pretty disappointing weekend just because he was seemingly very much outgunned, and thus he now has a drastically reduced points lead going into the last round, but there is still everything to play for in this championship. Shout out to Suta Arao, the former Red Bull Junior and still on recovery from his horrible, it really has to be said, horrific 2023. It was his best SuperFormula Lights weekend to date with a pair of P2s and keeping the pressure on Nonaka for, a reasonably long time in the third race, and he was really the only non-Toms entry to run well all weekend, so credit where credit's due. It's been a very good run from Arao. And then last but not least, we have Tsubasa Iriyama, a new entry for the round, and I just quickly have to point out he was vastly underwhelming and consistently off the pace in all of the races. And I mean, yes, it's a super small grid, so I'd imagine it's quite hard to come in and you've only got like 7, quote-unquote experienced drivers to go up against, but still, that was a pretty bad debut and nothing that signals we've got great things to come from this guy. We transition over to Spain, where the Euro Cup 3 title showdown lasted until the very last race of the year with an unexpected difference maker at the very end. Emerson Fittipaldi Jr. managed to take pole and win in race 1 under constant pressure from obviously title contender Christian Ho to essentially take away too many points for Ho to have a good shot at the title after that first race. Obviously, Fittipaldi has been surprisingly decent but not really great throughout the year, so he just stepped up at the perfect time to save the show for Javier Sagrera. Christian Ho did what he could in the second race by dominating the entire thing, but at this point Sagrera really only had to cruise in the midfield to take the title, at least mathematically. Now, there has been a big controversy going on and the title is not actually yet officially confirmed. We will pick up this story next week when hopefully everything is resolved, and obviously there will also be a lot less racing going on next week, so that'll be a more convenient time. But either way, just keep in mind, Sagrera won it on track, but is not actually yet confirmed to be the champion. Overall, it has to be said anyway, that for my money, Christian Ho has clearly been the most impressive driver. Campos often looked pretty much outgunned by MP, but he was not only the only rookie fighting at the front, period, but also the only Campos driver to consistently fight at the front. So I think it's very difficult to find much fault in what Christian Ho has been doing this year, and obviously has very much earned the F3 ride, which apparently he has got according to Jake Sansom, but he's not really been officially confirmed yet. Either way, it definitely needs to happen. Over in the MP camp, yes, Sagrera was the best overall, but I do want to highlight that for me, Bruno Del Pino was not far off. He has dropped off a little bit, it felt like, towards the end of the year. Maybe once he realized he wasn't actually going to be in the title fight, he dropped the ball a little bit maybe. I don't know, it's very difficult to tell, but they looked super closely matched, especially in the first half of the year. So I doubt that changed too much in just a couple of months. And then yeah, what a feel-good story it really was for Emerson Fittipaldi Jr., right? Much like Jesse Carrasquedo just a couple of rounds ago, that's a huge surprise result. To snipe a win, not just, in a lucky chaos, safety car, rain, whatever kind of race, but on merit, he, put it on pole and drove away. There's nothing you can say about how he drove, right? There's no criticism you can offer to this particular drive, at least not from the outside. I do want to highlight anyway that Jesse Carrasquedo has seemingly leveled up quite a bit ever since he got that particular win. And so this begs the question, is the same going to happen for Emo? Because I could see it happen. Obviously, finally getting that big result under your belt does give these very young and inexperienced drivers a lot of confidence going forward. And that actually, yes, can affect your raw pace at that early stage in your career. Then we transition to the slightly slower, but not any less action-packed Spanish F4 with a nail-biting title final between Keanu Alazari and Mattia Colnaghi. And I said it after the last round, yes, Keanu comes into this as a favorite. He's got the experience, he's got the gap, but Colnaghi's form looked almost unbeatable in previous rounds. And it actually held true here. Colnaghi, against all odds, with dominant wins in the first and the second race, brought himself right back into the favourite position going into the last race of the year. In the third race, neither of them were properly front running. I presume that has to do with tyre strategy. I think they only have 2 fresh sets for the races, so they have to sort of pick and choose when they take them. Obviously, if you're in the title hunt, you'd probably want to use them up early and just save as many points as you can. So I guess that's what happened here, purely speculating. Either way, Keanu Alazari just about found what he needed on track by taking P3 and defending it against Ernesto Rivera and Enzo Tamanichkul. But critically, Rivera and Nathan Toy got track limit time penalties, which promoted Mattia Colnaghi up to P5 after the race and handed him the title. So that really is one of the closest ways you can decide one of these titles. Keanu Alazari also got a late post-race penalty in the second race, making it not quite as close as it first appeared to be. But either way, a spectacular ending to a very, very good Spanish F4 season. Obviously, no doubt the second most competitive F4 series throughout the year, if we discount Euro 4. As always, it's a rookie versus non-rookie matchup. So for me personally, this means Colnaghi looked like the more impressive of the two anyway. But I don't want to take anything away from just the consistency required to do what both of these guys did throughout the year. In a grid like this, where not only is it a big grid of quite competitive drivers, but crucially it was also very crashy. Whenever you weren't at the very sharp end, it was super risky just to get the car through in one piece, and both of these managed very well on a consistent basis, and that's what it takes to win these titles. We also had the quiet star, I suppose, of Spanish F4, Juan Cota, ending the season in style by winning the third race. Again, presumably the opposite spectrum of the tyre strategy gamble, but I do think a very fitting result considering by some ways of measuring, I suppose, he may be the most impressive driver all year long, just because he did it in the weakest car out of all the front runners. And he actually ended up taking P4 in the championship overall, which is a hugely impressive result. And I can't wait to see him in a slightly quicker car going forward. A couple other bits and pieces. We have the Red Bull Junior, Christopher El Figali, with a really solid weekend to finish his campaign. Obviously, he's only done a 2-weekend sort of late season debut kind of thing. He was running in the top 10 in the second race. He just missed out in the other couple, so a fairly solid job there, and we know he'll be one of those to watch in the next season. And we equally had solid runs from Chase Fernandez and, somewhat more surprisingly, the American coming over, Hudson Schwartz, who's been good in the USF Juniors, but obviously that's not exactly an indicator that you'll do well in Europe, but he did, so it definitely deserves a shout out. And then to finish Spanish F4 for the year, we do have to put the spotlight on one of the quiet underdogs, Tim Gerhardt. Long key, one of my favorite stories of the year, obviously a Dutch graduate of the German karting championship, so I've been watching him for a little bit, and he has absolutely dominated Monla Motorsport's teammate Lenny Reed. He had really strong runs at Paul Ricard to score the only points of the team, and now managed to get one better with some sweet late race moves in the last race of the year to storm past the likes of Maciej Gladish, Griffin Peebles, Jan Przewski, to take P6 in his last race of the season. Surely also one of the tire gamble guys, no doubt about it in my mind, but he did really make the most of very little here, and I think he's done this throughout the season. And he is one that, you know, going back in a couple of years, if you just scroll through Wikipedia, you will think he did fuck all, and this is not true, and one thing we have to keep in mind. Anyway, let's talk about news. Everyone's favorite driver news segment, and we will keep it simple and just go from slow to fast. The slowest news of the week is Jack Beeton, somewhat surprisingly, stepping up to Frecker with Prema. Now, stepping up to Frecker is not surprising at all, and definitely the thing he needs to be doing in his career at this moment in time. But the thing of him going to Frecker is pretty surprising, and I have to say, it is a little bit of like poetic justice. Obviously, he's been the runner-up to Freddie Slater so many times this year, and throughout the season you could therefore ask the question, is it the driver or is it the car? Now, I do think we have the answer here. I do think Freddie is an absolute superstar, so I know where I would place my money. But obviously it is technically a legitimate question to be asked, so I am really glad we'll see these two go toe-to-toe in equal machinery next year. That should definitely be a banger, at least if Beeton can sustain what he did this year. Then we've had news that already started breaking last week, and I actually recorded about it last week, and then the announcement got sort of completed before I could release the episode, so I did edit it out afterwards, and it's Nikola Zoloff switching from the Alpine Academy to the Red Bull Junior team and also joining Campos for a third season in Formula 3. Now, there's obviously like three sides to this story. Is it good that he's leaving Alpine? Yes, the Alpine Academy isn't particularly great. They've got a bunch of talent stuck within it already, and they have just promoted a rookie for the first time in quite a while, technically ever, really, I guess. So, not the most promising project to be a part of at the first place. And then here, I think one crucial point is Jack Beeton and what he will be doing next season, because if Beeton hits the ground running in Formula 1 and does a good job, then yeah, maybe Alpine will be more inclined to take rookies going forward. But I could also see the Beeton project going, you know, at least pretty mediocre to poorly, not just because of Beeton, but also because Alpine itself is a bit of a mess, and I don't think it's a great environment to do well in. So yeah, and that could put them off the idea of taking another rookie. So either way, yes, it's great. Leave Alpine, go to the Red Bull Junior team that has seats available for rookies, at least if these rookies impress Helmut Marko enough, which I think Zoloff may be able to do. And then the last piece of the puzzle is obviously, is Campos a good destination? And yeah, certainly is. If you couldn't nail a Trident or Prema seat, then this is probably the third best option to end up in. Goethe has shown last year that you can in fact fight for the title in a Campos, and I think a little bit of a better driver than Goethe may have actually taken it in a Campos. So yeah, great stuff there. Then we have a couple of F2 related news, all sort of revolving around the Dennis Hauger moving to Indy next part of the season, because this means he also doesn't see the need to pay for 2 more F2 rounds, understandably so. Therefore, we have Richard Verschoor moving up from Trident to MP, which is rumored to be his home for next season. And then we have the biggest surprise bombshell of the trio, and that's Max Asterson, out of all people, getting the promotion to run the last 2 races at Trident. Now, Verschoor to MP, especially if he wants to stay there for his 5th season, that's a good move. We have talked about it already. I personally think it's pretty good for the series to have just a couple like older benchmark drivers that are actually like good as well. So I personally like Verschoor staying for 5th year, even though maybe from his personal point of view, like if I was his agent, I wouldn't recommend this. But as a fan, I'm all for it, basically, is the position I take there. Max Asterson going to Trident, though, is a really curious case. First of all, yes, he's been good in F3, probably as good as you can be in the Genta, but equally, I don't think he should be stepping up to F2 for a full season. Maybe he will, maybe that's like okay, we don't have unlimited money, let's burn it all on 1 year in the quickest car. I don't really know what the plan is here, but either way, it seems really weird from Trident as well not to put in Fornaroli. Obviously, we know Fornaroli probably doesn't have the budget, but come on, it's 2 races, maybe some sort of deal, maybe something, anything to give him a good shot next year. I don't know, it just seems like a really curious decision from all parties involved in that last one, really. Then obviously the bombshell news of last week, Gabriel Bortoleto getting the Sauber seat instead of Valtteri Bottas next year. Obviously both Bottas and Zhou leaving is a little bit sad. I don't think Zhou ever got a fair shot. I don't really think his junior records warrant him getting a super fair shot either. And I mean, yes, he's been in F1 3 years. That's a lot more than most people can say with a junior record like his. But equally, yes, he's been 3 years in the worst car. It doesn't really do anything for your CV. I don't even think he probably enjoyed it all too much. So it's a bit of a weird one in that sense. For Bottas leaving, it's probably about time. For both leaving, it's probably about time. They were at best the definition of average and probably a bit worse, at least in the case of Zhou, probably a lot worse. So either way, I do like Audi going for an all-new driver roster for next year. Going for Bortoleto is even better than just going for any new driver roster next year. Though I was really worried they were just going to go with something like Hülkenberg and Bottas, which would scream like a complete lack of ambition, just going with 2 sort of mediocre drivers. Yeah, Hülkenberg has had a good run, but you know you can give him whatever car you want, he probably won't win you a world championship. Bortoleto might. Obviously, that's not the ambition for Audi coming out of the gate. That would be absurd, but that's kind of how you have to think about your driver lineup, right? Like you would want to have at least one guy who you know can do the job if you gave him the tools, and Bortoleto is that man. Obviously, I've gone on and on about how much he's impressing this year because I underrated him going into the season. That's the price you have to pay. Then we have David Beckman going to ERT, Cairo, whatever you want to call the Chinese Formula E team instead of Sergio Sette Camara. And this, again, we have to look at both sides of the story. David Beckman getting a Formula E seat, I think is brilliant. I don't think he's like a superstar driver or anything, but I do think he is certainly too good and too young also to waste away as a pure sim driver instead of actually getting like professional opportunities anywhere. He really should. He is good enough for that, no doubt. But kicking Sergio Sette Camara doesn't make any sense. He's been, at the very least, just as good pound for pound as Dan Ticktum, if not better. And truth be told, the duo had nothing to work with last year. It would have at least just felt right to give them another shot in hopefully better equipment and see what they can do on merit. Either way, a bit of an unexpected and odd move, although I am very happy for Beckman. And then, last but not least, we had the confirmation of the rumors. It's nobody's surprise really that Robert Schwartzman will indeed be the second IndyCar Prema driver next to Callum Ilott. This means they've got a vastly experienced and super underrated single-seater lineup, massive experience across Europe, two of the guys that missed out on Formula One when they probably would have deserved an opportunity at least at one point during their F2 time. So I am really glad we'll get to see this, not just in isolation. It's really cool that he's back in single-seaters. It's really cool that Callum Ilott is, well, back in IndyCar. But more importantly, I also think it's super cool to have these two go up in the same machinery for an entire season of American open wheel racing. Anyway, it's been a lot, as is the tradition. Now it's your time to leave all of your thoughts down in the comments about the roster moves, about our new champions, and maybe about the Eurocup drama if you want to jump into that already. And otherwise, I'll thank you all for watching, and I hope to catch you in the next one.